now guns being the number one killer of all children. Before it was just Black and brown children, and predominantly more vulnerable communities who are Black and brown that were number one. But now that it's also white kids, okay, white women, do you care now? Let's show up.
Step up.
So you think the Democratic Party cares about Black people? Believe it or not, Rex, I think that tweet is part of the problem. Do you feel like we could have addressed this homeless issue much sooner? You have to speak a word, make it a good one.
Okay, let's go.
Welcome back to The Word. Once again, I'm Jackie Ray. We are going to address a topic that unfortunately seems to arise in our country every day, and that is the topic of gun violence. So if you don't know, ABC News has a gun violence tracker on its website. And right before the taping of this show, I went to that tracker and the numbers are startling. There have been 387 deaths and 822 injuries due to gun violence in the United States between May 6th and May 12th. There have been 35,228 deaths and over 67,000 injuries in the past year alone. So these numbers are definitely staggering. They are troubling. They should be troubling to all of us. Mass shootings are identified as a shooting where 4 or more people are shot. Doesn't mean they have to die, but it's 4 or more people are shot. I think something that's important to note, though, is while mass shootings are definitely troubling, they're not the majority of gun violence that happens in this country, but there's still a lot of gun violence that happens here. If you watch any kind of crime show, you know that gun violence happens across the board. So with that, I'm really excited to bring in two people who are trying their best to organize, which is one thing you always have to do when we have problems. You have to organize and address. So they are trying to organize. They are here with For the Kids Movement, which is calling on Governor Jared Polis to sign the executive order to ban guns and implement a statewide buyback program. And to achieve this goal, they are organizing a sit-in, and they want 25,000 white women from around the country to join them on Monday, June 5th at 5 a.m. in my home city of Denver, Colorado. So joining me now, they're heading to Denver on the 5th. Kaylee Caruso and Brittany Hart-Skolton is joining me now. Thank you guys so much for joining. You reached out to me just randomly. I appreciate that so much. I know you said you reached out to other media outlets as well. Have you had some feedback? I know this is such a hot topic. I feel like people would be eager to talk to people who are doing this in such a very interesting way. When we hear people talking about gun violence and gun control, they're not going to a specific city and calling people from around the country to join them. So I feel like this is a very interesting way to do this. So yes. What kind of attention have you drawn from this?
Thank you for getting back to me.
Of course.
No one else has.
Oh.
I've also sent out hundreds of emails and reached out to hundreds of people I know just locally in Long Beach because we're trying to get white women from all over the country to show up in Denver, and not a lot of responses. So really wanted to get more visibility of the people that haven't heard about it, who feel hopeless, who are parents, who are concerned about guns being the number one killer of children and teens right now in the U.S. And there's actually now an action that you can participate in to make sure your voice is heard, put your body on the line, and let's see if we can create change in a way that we never have yet, because what we're doing so far is not working.
Why are you specifically targeting 25,000 white women?
Yes, so the Black, Brown, and Indigenous women that started this action and organization, it's not, I don't think it's really considered an organization, just more of an action.
Movement?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Action, they understand, and me, who identifies as a cis white woman, I understand my power and privilege, institutional, socially, economically, and throughout history and in present day, right, that can be used to weaponize and cause harm. So what can we do with that power and privilege and use it for good? And that's put our bodies and voices on the line, demanding something that some view as radical. But for me, Googling bulletproof backpacks for my kids is more radical to me than banning guns.
And you have children?
I do. I have 3 children that go to school in Long Beach.
Okay. Brittany, do you have children
I
as well?
have 2 children who go to school in Long Beach as well.
And how did you find out about this action and the movement?
Sure. So it's Here for the Kids action. They have a great Instagram profile that you can go and look at. Somebody that I follow on Instagram that I don't know, but somebody in social change posted one of their videos, and I got really interested. I started following them. I asked my little sister to join me, who has not yet agreed, but maybe she'll listen to this podcast and she will come with me. But but I listened to their message, and I felt I felt really pulled to it. I felt like called out, like, white women, you need to step up. You need to put your bodies on the line. And historically you haven't, and historically, police violence is not the same against you, or we're not brutalized by the police. So we, should be safer doing something like this. And I also want to make sure that I say that this is a nonviolent sit-in,
Right.
and there will be some training beforehand for people on nonviolent communication before we go over Zoom. But yeah, I felt called by it. I felt, led by brilliant BIPOC women calling white women, say, you need to come out and do this. I'm not stop donating. Still, please donate, but don't just donate, and, call your local and federal politicians, because this stuff is not working. So let's call, like, for an abolitionist movement to ban guns and buy them back in Colorado.
Is this one of those things like we do sometimes when we're negotiating for a salary? We'll shoot way over what we want, hoping they negotiate us down to something we can tolerate? Or do you really want a full ban on guns?
That's what they're calling for, a full ban on guns. I think when we're looking at the other side in terms of potentially Republicans or conservatives, they've been organizing for decades. They're playing chess, right? They're showing up, they're banning trans, they're banning abortion, they're banning African American studies. This is radical. So calling for a ban of guns when we can call for assault rifles, right, to be banned. And that's what a lot of folks are doing. Like every town is doing that. Moms Demand. And the groundwork they've done has really allowed this action to exist. So we're so grateful for that. And how do we work together? Because the reality is assault weapons, we can ban them all day long, but gun violence, it's only 3 to 5% assault rifles. So we're still going to have mass shootings. We're still going to have gun violence. So why can't we ban all guns to create true safety in our communities?
I'm from Denver, Colorado. We talked a little bit before the show, and I'm just going to be honest. I had two pastimes when I was in Denver, maybe three on a good day. Whitewater rafting would be the third. I love to do that. But then bowling and going to the range every week. I personally at the time had three guns that I personally owned. Only reason that I don't own them now, we talked about this a little bit before we started the show, Brittany, is because when I moved to LA, I just decided as a Black woman driving across the country with guns in the car wasn't my best plan. So I got rid of my guns, and, of course, life took over and I wasn't making as much money. So my priority wasn't to get another one. However, as a person who not only owned guns before, really enjoyed them, I am a person who believes that, as if you're a law abiding citizen and you have a right to bear arms. So I think that sometimes when you say you want a full ban, I think people who are law-abiding citizens who would never do such things, and we do know that as much as I know people don't like that narrative, if a criminal wants to get a gun and break into your home and you're sitting there defenseless, you feel a little safer if you have a means to defend yourself. So I don't know if the average American who is a law-abiding gun owner, when they hear full ban of guns, I don't know if they hear that in a way that says, I'm going to be able to defend myself and my family. So what would you say to that person?
This movement and action is deeply rooted in the Second Amendment, because a lot of people bring the Second Amendment up, which is the right to bear arms. And if we want to look historically at the Second Amendment, it's rooted in white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So this movement, different than other movements and actions, is rooted in dismantling white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So we've had folks that join our movement who own tons of guns and enjoy it as a recreation and are willing to get rid of their guns to save lives. And I think that's just what it boils down to. It's that simple.
I hear that, but sometimes when I look at, the white supremacists, although I believe they're calling themselves white nationalists now, that went to the White House. There was hundreds of them, and we see them. Sometimes they're marching the streets with guns. Sometimes they did storm the Capitol on January 6th and have just received a slap on the wrist, basically. As a Black person, I don't see that, and I don't see the videos on Instagram of them training their children to be able to shoot. I don't see that and say, you know what, I need to give up my gun. I just don't, because if that's how they're preparing, I can't say, you know what, I need to be unprepared. That logic doesn't track for me. So while I hear you saying it's dismantling white supremacy, and the reality of it is not only does white supremacy exist, white supremacy is arming themselves. So how do we fight against that? And how do you tell people, you know what, it's for the safety of the children, though, we've got to get guns out of our communities. Like, how do you navigate both of those?
I hear you. And as anyone who is Black or brown and Indigenous, and I've had these conversations with friends and other folks that are asking the same questions, and as a white woman, right? Like, I understand why people of color want guns to feel safe against police station violence, right? Against white supremacy or supremacists. I understand that. So I think this is a broader ask, and we'll get to those details later of how people truly feel safe. Because, right, I feel like even as a person, if I had a gun at home, I would feel safer, but would I really be safer? So there's that conversation too of really getting to the nitty gritty and the intersectionality of what that truly exists. Because I understand, I get it, why Black and brown folks and Indigenous people feel safer with guns.
Some of that too is, when I was looking into this, when you contacted me, I do this topic a lot. Like, I freelance on a bunch of different radio shows, and all of them feed you this. This is what we want you to talk about. So obviously, I've looked up a lot of stuff, but I dug a little bit deeper on and looked at where do these numbers come from, because there's places that I felt their numbers should be higher when we're talking about mass shootings, and that's when I discovered that for a lot of these stats and whatnot, they don't include, when you're talking about mass shootings, they don't include gang violence. Like, gang violence has its own category. The problem with that for me is once you say that gang violence is different, the narrative shifts a little bit, because now it becomes, okay, this affects a certain group of people, but this gun violence over there, that's over there. We're going to address that separately. And so that's also a part of the narrative around this conversation with gun violence, that once I learned that gang violence was excluded from a lot of that, this is a problematic conversation. So, Brittany, I'm gonna go to you on that. Like, how do you resolve that in that thinking?
Well, I think we're calling for like a culture shift. I think, I mean, that's what dismantling white supremacy would look like in this country. And I don't know what a total, gun ban would look like across the United States, but I just have to say I'm not the brains behind this. I'm listening to the BIPOC women who are leading us to this movement, and to utilize our privilege of our color of our skin to sit there and ask for this. We didn't ask you, Jackie, if you're a mom.
I'm a godmom. I don't want children. And to be fair, part of the reason why I don't want children is because I don't like the world we live in. I don't want to raise a child in this because I don't think I have the temperament to do so. So I'm going to be an amazing godmom, and I'm going to leave it at that. But to your point, I can read the writing on the wall, and more than half of the gun violence, 33% of those occurred after 2010. So yes, we've had guns in our society for a while, but there's been some sort of shift, and that those numbers have increased. I also saw another number that I didn't know before, and that is that so there was a study that showed that 30% of mass shooters were suicidal before the shooting. 39% were suicidal at the time of the shooting. That number goes up drastically when you're talking about kindergarten through 12th grade. Those students who engaged in mass shootings were found that 92% of them were suicidal before the shooting. And when you talk about college, 100% of them were suicidal at the time of shooting.
I don't think that it means that we shouldn't be implementing things for mental health. Like, I think that is definitely going to be part of this, this broader conversation, but it has to start with banning guns. And then we get to the other items, because we have to get guns off the street to keep our kids safe.
There's so much intersectionality in all the challenges we face in our city of Long Beach, in our country, right? Like, just this last election in 2022. I mean, we're talking about homelessness, we're talking about public safety, and all of those intersect. So with us picking a certain subject or a certain topic or a certain challenge that we want to focus on, we're going to have a conversation about all those intersectionalities. And people bring up mental health a lot around gun safety. And is our country prioritizing mental health? Is our city really, truly prioritizing mental health? So what can we prioritize first? Can we remove one of the components to this narrative that's causing a lot of harm and damage and collective trauma for our country?
And then Tina Strong, is she the one that's one of the founders of it? I want to play her. I don't want to call it commercial because it really was a call to action. I want to play the call to action that she had on her Instagram. So I'm going to play that right now.
13,572, 481 teens. Guns are the #1 killer of children. What are you going to do about it? Try learning from history.
Our ancestors and the Black leaders of the civil rights movement gave us the blueprint. Having the blueprint of just ordinary people who did this extraordinary thing, that's how intentional we have to be. That's how committed to this we have to be. They kept coming back and give us what we now have as the Voting Rights Act.
I sent the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to guarantee every man and woman the right to vote.
That's why I say Denver's our Selma. Denver's our opportunity to show up in mass numbers, white women specifically, because this is our moment. Our Black civil rights leaders showed us the way, and now it's time to show up. John Lewis has told us to get into good trouble.
Denver is good trouble.
Prove that this is what you would be doing, because this is what the moment calls for right now. It's time for white women to show up.
So take your Instagram post and get your asses to Denver.
So that was very powerful. Is that what you saw, both of you, that's what called you to join in on this?
Well, two of the other women that are leading this movement as well, they're authors, and they actually just spoke at a CCEJ event in February, I want to believe, California Conference of Equality and Justice, right here in Long Beach. And that's how I got introduced to them. I read their book, and then started following them on social media. Really believe in the work they're doing, what they're rooted in, and similar to Brittany, it's important. I really value talking the talk and walking the walk. And as a white woman, I have to show that. I have to walk the walk. And this, if someone's calling me to action, I'm going to show up.
I'm glad you said that, because for me, the reference to Selma was problematic for me. And I'm going to tell you why, because I think sometimes, and this happens a lot when we're talking about Black history specifically in this country, we don't paint the full picture. We'll give you up to the I have a dream speech, but we won't go beyond that, But with Dr. Martin Luther King specifically, he said, with Selma, when we're talking about allies, we're not talking about people who really wanted the Black person to have equality at that time. We were talking about white people who were tired of seeing the brutality against Black people. These are two very different things. And I'm from Denver. Racism is a problem in Denver, and 37% of white women in Denver voted for Donald Trump. So they either voted against their own interest as women, period, or they voted for racism, or both.
Both.
You think it's both?
Yeah.
Was it possible that these women have changed? Any of them? Like a small percentage of them? I know a lot of people who voted for Trump the first time around, and the second time around who vote, Republican their entire life, and they voted for Biden the second time around because they just couldn't have someone that terrible in the White House and just wrecking our country.
But is that not the same as what Dr. Martin Luther King said? You're not voting to really change the system. You're voting because there's one part of the system that you no longer want to see.
So as a white woman, I live my life calling in other white women, because we're all different on this journey. It's a lifelong journey of unlearning and using our privilege and power for good. Right. So some women will be at different stages of that journey. For me, this work is rooted in my freedom too. My freedom as a cis white woman is enwrapped in other women's freedom, and that's women of color. I won't be truly free as a woman until other women are free. So this isn't about white saviorism or coming to the rescue or doing something just because I'm tired of seeing children die. To me, it's deeper, but for everyone it is different. But that's the important part also of this action, is it's sparking and planting seeds of these conversations, because it's 2023. If white women aren't aware and doing their own research and learning of how they can perpetuate harm, then that's difficult, right, to understand. So it is my job as a white woman to hold space for that. It's definitely not your job.
Right.
So we'll be sitting there all day. So let's have those conversations.
I'm definitely for the movement. Like, I know I seem, like, because I'm with you. I don't want to feel like I'm a centrist, but for me, sometimes this movement on either side feels more like the need to be right than the need to actually implement change. Like the people on the other side are like, I want my guns, full stop. Like, there's no other logic. It's just, I want my guns. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, even as a person who likes to shoot, I don't own guns now. Do I plan on owning guns in the future? Probably. But do I need to? Not if I'm in a situation where I feel safe, which is why I can say, okay, you guys want to create a situation that's safe. What does that mean, though? Because sometimes for me, the conversation about gun control feels insincere when we don't start with police. Those who are in authority and they have power, and we have to have full on marches just to get justice when they do something wrong. Like, what are we talking about now? Because if we were talking about police that aren't going to show up and shoot first and ask questions later, specifically if you're Black or brown, then maybe I hear that and I'm like, yeah, you're right. But that's not the world that I live in. So for me, it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, you have to really dismantle a lot of things before you tell people they don't need to be prepared. But because it's a pendulum for me.
Yes. No, it makes so much sense. And like I mentioned before, there's so much intersectionality. But if we don't start with one thing, then we won't get to any of the things. And I couldn't agree more with you on accountability, police brutality, the violence that happens, the lack of accountability. Even if someone who's Black or brown doesn't have a gun, they still get shot and accused of having a gun. Right. So I couldn't agree more on that. And there's so many specifics. But organizing folks that are liberal, Democrats, white women, that's a broader thing. We can hit all the other things after that. Environment, let's go. Abortion rights, let's go. How do we get white women involved in this? And just showing the percentage that voted for Trump. And there's a lot of work to be done for white women with white women. I just had to have a talk with my kids this last week about what would happen if there was a shooting at school or in a public place that we were. And my kids are like, I don't want to talk about this. I don't either. It's so uncomfortable. It's so hard. But I want you to be prepared. And I don't want you to be even more scared because you don't know what to do. So that's radical. Having conversations with our children, that's radical about that. Black and brown and Indigenous parents having to talk to their kids about police brutality, about keep your head on swivel, all of these things, that's radical. And it takes now guns being the number one killer of all children. Before it was just Black and brown children and predominantly more vulnerable communities who are Black and brown that were number one. But now that it's also white kids, okay, white women, do you care now? Let's show up.
Step up.
Are you guys the only two going from Long Beach?
That we know of.
As of right now, I mean, with this getting visibility before June 4th, please reach out to me via Instagram or social media if you're interested. We have people even willing to fund people's trips there, but that can't make it, but want to support people showing up and going. So if severely financial means are a barrier, then let me know and we can figure that out.
Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. That was great. Are you hoping that, let's say in a perfect world this happened and there was a ban, on guns and he did this buyback, are you also hoping for harsher punishment for those who are found to have guns and maybe they don't want to relinquish their weapons? Are you hoping for something like that as well?
That's a really tough
Yeah,
question.
I haven't even thought about that.
Because I hate massacres. You're right.
Because I also believe in like restorative justice. I also don't believe in like punishment. And the fact this is just starting in Denver because Denver has the most mass school shootings, a Democratic governor who's probably not backed by the NRA. And then we want to go state by state. Governor Newsom, we're coming for you next. You have children. You have political aspirations. What are you going to do to protect our children?
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's always been one of the things that I've always thought we should start with is the NRA should not be allowed to back any politician. They shouldn't have any place in politics.
The POA as well.
Oh, great point. Thank you guys so much. So you guys are leaving, what time is it's at 5 a.m. on
5 a.m. Mountain Time.
Please go to here, number 4 for the kids. And please learn more about it. Ask any questions, reach out, because we didn't even get all the specifics, but a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking your time and having us.
This is great. I'm going to link the Instagram page so you can see there's a lot of information on there that I think is actually quite good. So, and it might inspire you. But wherever you fall on this gun control issue, whether you believe we should have guns or not, I think you can't argue loss of life. You just can't. And we're just losing too many people to senseless gun violence. So wherever you stand on this, just know something has to be done. And at some point, we're all going to have to pick a side. So keep that in mind. And remember, if you have to speak a word, make it a good one. We'll see you next time.
Let's go.